The most actually that China got out of these meetings before the APEC summit was a working group established by the United States and China to talk about economic issues, and perhaps some strong and lofty rhetoric about how decoupling is not beneficial for either side. That's it. That's all that China ever received. So really, there weren't any concessions made at all for the Chinese side. And almost in each instance, U.S. diplomacy was sabotaged from the very beginning. You may remember the first visit of Antony Blinken back in the spring, the late spring of 2023. He went to Beijing and the talks were very cordial, according to the readout. Then Joe Biden goes to the Western mainstream media, goes to the US mainstream media, and he calls Xi Jinping a dictator. Janet Yellen goes to China, when I was in China actually, in July. As she is going to China, the US Department of State issues a travel warning for all Americans to be careful about traveling to China. Kind of a strange thing to do when your Secretary of Treasury is going to negotiate with the highest levels of China's cabinet. Then you had Gina Raimondo go to China later on in the summer of 2023. And she comes back shocked at what she found when it came to the Huawei Mate Pro 60, after she had discussed how China and the US need to essentially rectify issues where they can rectify them. She comes back and she tells the media that she's shocked and appalled about Huawei's ability to build advanced chips and release a phone to skirt US sanctions. So in each and every instance, the United States, the neocons, they undermined US so-called diplomacy. They sank relations back to the level where they were before, because all of this, in my opinion, is a ruse. It's an act. It's all about covering for the US's other crises abroad, Ukraine, and now you have Gaza absolutely on fire because of US failures in both regions. So let me pull up the latest in what is the diplomatic catastrophe that is the United States and the neocon foreign policy establishment. So directly after Joe Biden met with the president of China, Xi Jinping, he gave a press conference and he was asked a very specific question. And now you have to watch Antony Blinken's face, because this is priceless, absolutely priceless, this reaction, because I think it gets into the reality of what we are seeing in terms of US decline and its failed attempts to maintain some kind of public relations image as it essentially sets fire to the world. So here is Joe Biden being asked a question to the press, and here is how Antony Blinken reacted to Joe Biden's response.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs the country that is.
He didn't look too happy there, did he? So let's turn back the clock a little bit, okay? Let's turn back the clock because we have to see this again.
Xi as a dictator. This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense.
So that's the face of the American empire crashing and burning. Now, what's interesting about this is that Blinken has played his huge role in being one of the worst diplomats, if not the worst diplomat in U.S. history, to be thrust into many different historic crises and over again fail again and again to stabilize the U.S.'s position in the world is an utter failure, regardless of whether his role is supposed to be a stenographer and a water carrier for war, which he is, and that's what the Department of State has always been, but in recent years has intensified and become. Doesn't matter. The fact is that that's the face of failure. This is the face of failure. This is the face of the United States setting their entire position in the world ablaze. And for what? For Joe Biden? I mean, this does not feel scripted. There were the Mint Press published a video of Joe Biden in another press conference talking about Hamas. It might have been the same one, actually, getting questions about Hamas. And he starts talking about the hostages, and Blinken is shaking his head no. And Joe Biden says, "Oh, I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm not supposed to say anything else." This is what we're dealing with here. This is what we're dealing with here. So in effect, we are screwed. But this is what happened. So let's watch it one more time, because we have to watch it one more time. I mean, this is gold.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy that runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
So there you have it. What else is there to say? It's completely undone. The United States, in just a comment to the press, completely undid what was supposed to be a relatively drama-free APEC summit. It was supposed to be a signature of the United States, where the United States, the Joe Biden administration, can talk about how it actually accomplished something on the diplomatic front, especially with China. This was supposed to be an opportunity for the United States, with all of the failures happening, the United States failing to exercise any kind of strength when it comes to the Gaza war, when it comes to the brutal war on Gaza, the entire region, the so-called Middle East, but let's call it West Asia. The U.S. can't assert anything. The United States, on the one hand, is announcing that it's worried about being pulled into a broader war, and on the other side is doing everything it can to ignite a broader war with Iran and Hezbollah. That's what the United States is doing. It has absolutely no control over Israel. Israel is basically doing whatever the heck it wants right now. It's doing whatever it wants. And so that's a diplomatic failure, because Netanyahu's going on the mainstream media every single day in the West, especially in the United States, and he's doing exactly what he did in U.S. Congress at the end of the Obama administration. He is lashing out at the United States, at President Biden in particular, who he never really liked because they stand on the opposite wings of the same bird of the foreign policy establishment. He is going and talking and lambasting Joe Biden, how ineffective he is, and how he can do whatever he wants, and he doesn't have any real fears in the world about the United States because they're getting blank checks. And of course, the Biden administration is exercising zero diplomacy at all. The region, too. Every single time Blinken goes to the region outside of meeting with the Israeli government, no one really wants to talk to Blinken. Why is that? Well, what are they offering? They're offering nothing. They're not allowing for any kind of ceasefire. They're not supporting what they claim to have supported for years, the UN resolution on a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. No, none of that. They're giving nothing to the region. In fact, they're escalating while trying to claim that they are on the right side of this conflict, that they care about civilian deaths and all of that. So and then there's Ukraine. They're failing in Ukraine. The Ukraine conflict is finished. It's over. The counteroffensive, forget it. It's history. We don't even have to talk about it anymore. The fighting is frozen. Russia is progressing. Ukraine has nothing left. The United States doesn't even pretend that it does. And now there are rumors that they're trying to covertly push for peace, while, of course, maintaining the same stance that it always has. Russia, the aggressor. We're not going to ever sue for peace. There's going to be no peace until Ukraine wins everything. Right? So failure after failure, monumental ones. And then you have, of course, now China, where there was an opportunity to, with much time left in the elections, I predict that all of this was going to be unwritten anyway come the 2024 election. If you watched the 2020 election in the United States, then you know Joe Biden and Donald Trump vied and competed hard for who could be tougher on China. And so there's absolutely no hope for the United States to change anything policy-wise around that period, because the United States, both political parties, are going to use China as a political issue because they need to satisfy the neocons, the Pentagon, and all of it. They need to satisfy the neocon foreign policy establishment, the military contractors for an election campaign, and aggression toward China is very profitable toward those ends. So this was always temporary anyway. But the fact that the Biden administration is likely to end its first and maybe only term in the White House with zero foreign policy signatures, zero foreign policy achievements. You had Obama with the Iran nuclear deal. You had Trump with his attempt to play at dynamics in the Korean Peninsula, which and really opportunistically trying to take advantage of the fact that you had a South Korean government willing to negotiate with the DPRK for a normalization process. The fact that Donald Trump was able to do those things and Joe Biden can't seem to get anywhere with anything, I think goes to show that this has become a historic moment of crisis from which Biden was never prepared to address. And Biden himself, in my opinion, represents this conflict amongst the neocons, right? Represents this utter decline that the United States has found itself in, and that China now has to deal with constantly. And many people wonder, why did Xi Jinping go to San Francisco? You could say now, yeah, good question, because the United States doesn't seem, or it never seems to be, a good faith actor, not even when it desperately needs to be one. Joe Biden desperately needed this. Joe Biden desperately needed something that gave the impression to the world that the United States is not just run by a bunch of warmongering lunatics. Seriously.